A millionaire known for his coldness decides to force his poor housekeeper to bring her baby daughter to work. Afraid and ashamed, the young woman arrives at the mansion trembling, certain she will be humiliated in front of everyone. But instead of exploding in fury, the boss surprises the world by kneeling down and playing with the child. From this unexpected gesture, the once icy house transforms into the stage for a change no one could have imagined. The morning dawned grey over the Bronx, on the outskirts of New York City. Lucy Peterson woke before her alarm, as she had every day for nearly a year ever since Sophia was born. The small two-room apartment still held the silence of those early hours, a luxury that would be short-lived. She looked at the makeshift crib where her daughter slept peacefully, oblivious to the worries weighing on her mother's shoulders. At 28, Lucy carried more stories of struggle than many people twice her age. She had lost Michael, her husband, in a construction accident when she was in her 7th month of pregnancy. There was no time for goodbyes, only a sudden void that had to be filled with strength and determination. She had been a cleaner at the Montgomery mansion on the Upper East Side for 3 years, a job that paid little, but was stable, a rarity for someone who, like her, had only completed high school. Lucy prepared the baby bottle while mentally organizing her day. Mrs. Jenkins, the 65-year-old neighbor who looked after Sophia while she worked, had warned her that she needed to travel urgently to Ohio. Her daughter was about to give birth and needed help. "It will only be 2 weeks, my dear," Mrs. Jenkins had assured her the day before, with the guilty look of someone who knew the trouble she was causing. 2 weeks, Lucy whispered to herself as the water for her coffee boiled. The neighborhood's community daycare, her most viable alternative, was temporarily closed. The only teacher had resigned after 3 months of delayed salaries, and the city council kept promising a replacement who never arrived. Sophia woke up, her brown eyes blinking sleepily before opening completely. She had the same sweet gaze as her father, Lucy thought, feeling that familiar pang in her chest. She picked up her daughter, inhaling the baby smell that always calmed her heart. "Good morning, my love. Mommy has a big problem today, you know." She spoke in a soft tone while changing the little one's diaper. "But we'll figure it out. We always do." The clock read 6:15. In less than 2 hours, she needed to be at the Montgomery mansion, impeccably dressed in the grey uniform she hated, ready for another day of hard work under the critical eye of Sebastian, the butler who seemed to have been born just to point out imperfections. After feeding Sophia, Lucy picked up the phone. She dialed 5 different acquaintances, all in the same precarious situation as her. Working women, single mothers, life's tightrope walkers. None could help. Some were leaving for work, others had unavoidable commitments. She sat down on the only chair in the small kitchen, with Sophia on her lap, and allowed herself a few seconds of despair. Missing work was not an option. Richard Montgomery, the owner of the mansion and CEO of Montgomery Holdings, was known as much for his fortune as for his intolerance of failure. British punctuality and German efficiency was his motto, repeated like a mantra by Sebastian. Richard had lost his wife, Helen, to a sudden heart complication 5 years ago. Since then, he had transformed into what the staff called an ice storm, cold, unpredictable, and devastating. No one lasted more than 6 months working directly with him, except for Sebastian, who seemed immune to his boss's temperament by sharing his coldness. Lucy was one of the few exceptions. She had been working at the mansion since before Helen's passing, and somehow had managed to become invisible enough not to arouse her boss's wrath. She did her job with quiet dedication, appearing and disappearing through the corridors like a shadow, avoiding direct eye contact. She survived. "And now, Sophia, what does Mommy do?" she murmured, kissing the forehead of her daughter, who was distractedly playing with a button on her worn blouse. Then, as if a light bulb went on in her mind, Lucy had an idea. A terrible, risky, almost professionally suicidal idea. But the only one available at that moment. She would take Sophia to the mansion. She would hide her in a large bag, keep her in the small back room used for storing cleaning supplies, feed her during breaks, and pray she wouldn't cry too much. It was madness. But what alternative did she have? At 6:40, Lucy was already at the bus stop, carrying a larger-than-usual bag where she had packed diapers, bottles, a few changes of clothes, and quiet toys. Sophia was bundled up on her lap, protected from the July cold that gripped the city. During the nearly 1-hour journey to the Upper East Side, she mentally rehearsed explanations, excuses, pleas. She would try to talk to Mrs. Gable, the housekeeper. She was strict, but she had been a single mother too, perhaps she would understand. If that didn't work, she would speak to Sebastian, something she usually avoided at all costs. As a last resort, she would beg Richard Montgomery directly, though the mere thought made her stomach churn. She got off the bus 2 blocks from the mansion, her heart pounding erratically. Sophia was drowsy after the trip, a small miracle that Lucy silently thanked. The Montgomery mansion was an imposing 3-story neoclassical building, with marble columns at the entrance and a garden that seemed transported directly from some European palace. Lucy entered through the back gate, as she always did, greeted by the security guard Anthony, who just nodded. "Morning, Tony," she greeted, trying to seem normal while adjusting Sophia on her lap and the bag on her back. "Morning," he replied, without looking up from his newspaper. "The boss got back from his trip last night." He's got that look on his face. Lucy felt a chill. Richard in a bad mood meant everyone would be walking on eggshells all day. "Thanks for the heads up," she murmured, quickening her pace through the service entrance. The first obstacle would be the locker room where she changed her clothes. Normally it would be empty at that hour. Lucy always arrived earlier than the other staff. But today, of all days, Martha, another cleaner, was there, fixing her hair in front of the small mirror. "Lucy! Martha's greeting died in her throat when her eyes landed on Sophia. "Good heavens, did you bring your daughter?" "Martha, please," Lucy implored, gently placing Sophia on the bench while opening her metal locker to get her uniform. "I have no one to leave her with. Mrs. Jenkins traveled. The daycare is closed. I'm desperate." Martha glanced around as if the walls could hear. "Are you crazy? If Sebastian finds out you're out on the street, if Mr. Richard finds out, you'll never work in a family home in this neighborhood again. You think I don't know that?" Lucy replied, changing quickly while Sophia watched the fluorescent lights on the ceiling. "But what do I do?" "Leave her home alone. Quit my job." The other woman sighed, running a hand through her already perfectly styled hair. "Look, I won't say anything, but I can't help either. Sebastian was on my case last week because the office floor wasn't reflecting like a mirror. If I get involved—" "You don't have to get involved," Lucy cut in, finishing buttoning her uniform. "Just don't tell anyone, please." Martha nodded hesitantly. "I'll pretend I saw nothing. But Lucy, be careful." With her uniform on, Lucy settled Sophia on her hip again and the bag on her back. She left the locker room and headed down the service corridor, praying not to run into anyone on her way to the small room where she kept her cleaning supplies and equipment. She almost made it. She was just 10 feet away when she heard the voice she feared most. Lucy. The dry, slightly drawling tone was unmistakable. Sebastian, the butler, was standing behind her, rigid in his impeccable black suit, his critical gaze fixed on Sophia. "What is the meaning of this?" Lucy felt her legs tremble. For an insane second she thought about running. But where to? She took a deep breath and turned around. "Good morning, Mr. Sebastian. I had no one to leave my daughter with. The person who cares for her had to travel for an emergency and the daycare is closed. I thought I'd keep her in the supply room while I work. She won't be any trouble, I swear. It's just for today while I find a solution." Sebastian's face remained impassive, but his eyes narrowed dangerously. "You know this is completely unacceptable. Mr. Montgomery's rules are clear." "I know, but it's an emergency. Mr. Richard does not tolerate personal emergencies," he cut in, unyielding. "Personal problems are not excuses for professional failures." He repeated that in last month's staff meeting, if you recall. Lucy felt despair rising. Sophia, perhaps sensing the tension, began to fuss in her arms. "Please," she pleaded, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm alone. I have no family here. If I lose this job—" Sebastian adjusted the cuffs of his shirt, a gesture he made when he was about to make an unpleasant decision. "Wait here." Without further explanation, he turned on his heel and walked briskly toward the main staircase. Lucy stood paralyzed, her heart racing. She knew exactly where he was going, to Richard Montgomery's office. The 5-minute wait felt like an eternity. Sophia started to whimper softly, perhaps feeling hungry again. Lucy tried to calm her, rocking her gently while whispering reassuring words she didn't believe herself. Finally, Sebastian reappeared, descending the stairs with the same rigid posture. His face was still unreadable. "Mr. Richard wishes to speak with you," he announced. Now, Lucy felt her blood run cold. In 3 years of working in that house, she had seen Richard Montgomery maybe 10 times, always from a distance. She had never exchanged more than 2 words with him. Being summoned to his office under these circumstances could only mean one thing: dismissal. Is he going to fire me personally?" she asked, her voice trembling. Sebastian didn't answer, merely gesturing for her to follow him. Lucy obeyed, each step a torture. Sophia, in her arms, seemed to have understood the gravity of the situation and remained strangely quiet, her wide eyes observing the ornate ceiling of the main corridor, a place Lucy rarely had to go. Sebastian stopped before an imposing dark wood door and knocked 3 times. A deep voice answered from within, "Come in." The butler opened the door and gestured for Lucy to enter. She hesitated for a second, adjusted Sophia in her arms and stepped inside. The office was exactly as she had imagined, imposing, austere, impeccably organized. Large bookshelves covered 2 walls. A huge window overlooking the garden dominated the 3rd, and on the 4th, behind a mahogany desk, was him. Richard Montgomery, 42 years old, black hair with silver threads at the temples, an angular face, and penetrating blue eyes that seemed to pierce through anyone who dared to meet them. He wore a tailor-made navy blue suit that probably cost more than a year of Lucy's salary. Lucy felt her legs tremble as Richard observed her with a glacial gaze. For a moment no one spoke. The only sound in the office was the soft ticking of an antique wall clock. So, Richard finally broke the silence, his voice deep and controlled. "Sebastian informs me that you've brought a child into my home." It wasn't a question, but a statement. Lucy swallowed hard, clutching Sophia a little tighter to her chest. "Yes, sir. I'm sorry, I had no choice. The lady who cares for her had to travel for an emergency, and the community daycare is closed because the teacher quit. I don't have any family here in New York, and—" He raised a hand, cutting her off. His eyes shifted from Lucy to Sophia, who was now watching him curiously. "How old is she?" The question caught Lucy off guard. She had expected shouting, threats of dismissal, not a question about her daughter's age. 11 months, sir." Richard leaned back in his chair, his fingers drumming on the mahogany desk. His face remained indecipherable. "And the father?" "He passed away when I was pregnant." "A construction accident?" Something imperceptible changed in Richard's gaze, so quickly that Lucy almost believed she had imagined it. "I see." He fell silent for a few more seconds, which felt like hours to Lucy. Then, without warning, he stood up from his chair and walked to the window, turning his back to her. He was tall, with an impeccable posture, his broad shoulders highlighted by the perfect cut of his suit. "You know there are rules in this house," he said, still with his back to her, observing the garden. "Rules I established for good reasons. I do not tolerate lateness, failures, or excuses. And I certainly did not expect to find a child here today." Lucy felt a tear escape, which she quickly wiped away with the sleeve of her uniform. She could already see herself on the bus back home, unemployed, with no prospects. "I'll just get my things and leave immediately," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "I apologize for the trouble, Mr. Montgomery." Richard turned, facing her with those piercing blue eyes. "I didn't say you were fired." Lucy blinked, confused, but nothing. "You have a personal problem that is affecting your work. I have 2 options: fire you or allow you to solve this problem." He paused. "Personal problems are not an excuse to miss work. Therefore, solve them here." Lucy frowned, not understanding what he meant. "Sir, I'm saying you can bring your daughter to the mansion until you find another solution, temporarily." Lucy's mouth fell open in shock. Of all the possible responses, that was the last one she would have expected. Are you serious, sir? Do I look like a man who makes jokes, Lucy?" His tone was dry but not hostile. "No, sir." Thank you so much. I promise she won't be a bother. I'll keep her in the back room. No one will even notice she's—" "No," he cut in. "You will not keep a baby locked in a chemical storage closet." "That would be irresponsible." Richard walked to his desk and pressed a button on his phone. "Sebastian, come to the office." In less than a minute, the butler was at the door. "Yes, Mr. Richard." "Lucy's daughter will be staying at the mansion temporarily. Prepare the old nursery on the second floor for her. Remove the sheets from all the furniture. Open the windows, clean everything. See what else a baby needs and provide it." The shock on Sebastian's face was almost comical. "The old nursery? But sir, that room has been closed since—" "I'm perfectly aware of how long it has been closed," Richard interrupted, a shadow crossing his gaze. "Do as I've instructed." "Yes, sir," Sebastian replied, casting a confused glance at Lucy before withdrawing. Richard turned his attention back to Lucy, who was still trying to process what was happening. "You can leave your daughter in that room while you work. During your breaks, you can go there to care for her. This is temporary, do you understand? I expect you to find a permanent solution as soon as possible." "Yes, Mr. Montgomery. Thank you so much. I don't even know how to thank you." "Thank me by working as you always do," he cut in. "This is a practical solution, not a favor. Don't confuse the two." Sophia chose that moment to let out a happy squeal, reaching her tiny hand out towards Richard. The businessman looked at the child as if only now truly noticing her presence. "What's her name?" he asked, his voice sounding strangely different. "Sophia, sir." Richard nodded slightly, and for an instant, so brief that Lucy again thought she had imagined it, his lips curved into an almost smile. "You may go, Lucy, and close the door on your way out." Leaving the office, Lucy found Sebastian in the hallway, still looking confused and slightly annoyed. "Come," he said curtly. "I'll show you where the child will stay." They walked down a long corridor on the second floor, passing several closed doors until they reached a door at the end. Sebastian took a set of keys from his pocket and selected an old silver one. "This room has been closed for 5 years, he explained, almost whispering. "Since Mrs. Helen, since the incident. It's the old nursery." The door opened with a slight creak. The room was dark, with all the windows covered by thick curtains. When Sebastian turned on the lights, Lucy stifled a gasp of surprise. It was a large, charming room, clearly decorated with love and care. There were shelves with children's books, old toys carefully arranged, a noble wooden crib, a rocking chair, a colorful rug, everything covered in white sheets like ghosts frozen in time. Mrs. Helen was pregnant when she passed, Sebastian said in a low, reverent tone. Mr. Richard had prepared this room for the child that never came. After she was gone, he ordered that everything be kept intact, but he never set foot in here again. No one has been in here for 5 years. Lucy felt a tightness in her chest. She finally understood why Richard had become the cold, distant man everyone feared. It wasn't just the loss of his wife. It was also the loss of the child he never knew. "I didn't know." "Few people do," Sebastian replied, as he began removing the sheets from the furniture, raising small clouds of dust. "He doesn't allow it to be spoken of. Never has." Sophia watched the room with curious eyes, trying to reach for objects with her chubby little hands. "Why is he doing this?" Lucy asked, still unable to believe it. "Why let my daughter use this room?" Sebastian stopped what he was doing and looked at her with an expression she couldn't decipher. "That, my dear, is something I would also like to know." In the following hours, the room was completely transformed. Mrs. Gable, the housekeeper, after overcoming her initial shock, coordinated a cleaning team. Meanwhile, Lucy was sent to start her day's chores, leaving Sophia in the temporary care of Martha, who, despite her initial fear, had offered to help while the room was being prepared. The news of a child's presence in the mansion and, more shockingly, of Richard's decision to reopen the old nursery spread quickly among the staff. The looks Lucy received varied from curious to envious, from understanding to judgmental. At 10 in the morning, when she took a break to check on Sophia, Lucy found the room unrecognizable. It was clean, airy, with the curtains open revealing a stunning view of the garden. The crib had fresh sheets, there were clean toys available, and Sophia was sitting on the colorful rug, happily playing with a rubber ball. "She's been very well behaved," reported Mrs. Gable, who was sitting in the rocking chair watching the little one. The housekeeper, normally austere and distant, seemed to have been won over by Sophia's smile. She drank all her bottle and didn't even cry when Martha had to go back to work. "I've been keeping an eye on her. "Thank you so much, Mrs. Gable," Lucy said, moved. "I don't know how to repay such kindness." The grey-haired lady waved off the thanks. "It's not every day we see a miracle in this house, child. Mr. Richard wouldn't let anyone touch this room, not even to clean. For 5 years, only I was allowed to enter once a month to dust, check that everything was in order, and leave. He never came here, never asked about the room. It was as if it didn't exist." Lucy sat on the floor next to Sophia, who immediately crawled into her lap. "So why now? Why allow my daughter to use this space?" Mrs. Gable shook her head slowly. "Who knows what goes on in that man's head? Since Mrs. Helen passed, he's closed up like an oyster. He was a different man before, you know. Still demanding, of course, but he smiled. He had life in his eyes." At that moment, Sophia picked up the ball and, with surprising strength for a baby, threw it through the open door of the room. The ball bounced in the hallway and rolled to a stop at the feet of someone passing by. Richard Montgomery bent down and picked up the toy. For an instant, he stood in the doorway observing the scene before him. Lucy sitting on the rug, Sophia in her lap, Mrs. Gable in the rocking chair. His face, as always, revealed no emotion. "I see the room is adequate," he commented, taking a few steps inside and looking around. "Yes, sir," replied Mrs. Gable, rising respectfully. "Everything is clean and organized, as you requested." Richard nodded, still holding the ball. His eyes fell on Sophia, who was staring at him with childish curiosity. For a moment, everyone was silent, the tension palpable in the air. Then, to the astonishment of Lucy and Mrs. Gable, Richard approached and knelt before Sophia, holding out the ball to her. "This is yours, isn't it?" he said in a tone Lucy had never heard from him, soft, almost gentle. Sophia looked at the ball, then at Richard, and then let out a crystal-clear laugh, grabbing the toy with her clumsy little hands. Instead of moving away, Richard remained kneeling, watching the girl with an unreadable expression. "She has expressive eyes," he commented, seemingly talking to himself. "She gets them from her father," Lucy replied automatically, then blushed upon realizing the intimacy of the comment. Richard just nodded, still looking at Sophia. "And the smile?" The question took Lucy by surprise. "They say it's like mine." He extended his index finger towards the baby, who promptly grabbed it with her tiny hand. A flicker of something, perhaps surprise, perhaps another more complex emotion, passed through Richard's eyes. "She has a firm grip." "Yes," Lucy agreed, still in disbelief at what she was witnessing. "She's strong and determined. When she wants something, she doesn't give up easily." "An admirable quality," Richard commented, finally standing up. He adjusted his impeccable suit jacket and resumed his formal posture. "Mrs. Gable, arrange for everything this baby needs during her stay here. Proper food, diapers, whatever is necessary." "Yes, sir." Richard headed for the door, but before leaving, he turned to Lucy. "I want daily reports on her adjustment. If there are any problems, inform Sebastian or me directly immediately." "Yes, sir." "And thank you again." He made a dismissive gesture with his hand. "As I said, it's a practical solution." He hesitated for a moment, as if wanting to add something, but then simply nodded and left, his footsteps echoing down the hall. When the footsteps faded, Mrs. Gable let out the breath she had apparently been holding. "Good Lord," she murmured, making the sign of the cross. "I have never, in 5 years of working in this house, seen Mr. Richard bend down to pick something up from the floor, much less to give it to a child." Lucy was still trying to process what had just happened. "He seemed different." "Different?" Mrs. Gable repeated with an incredulous smile. "Child, that man who just left here is a complete stranger to everyone who works in this house. The Mr. Richard we know doesn't play with children, doesn't ask personal questions, and above all, does not enter this room." Sophia, oblivious to the significance of the moment she had just experienced, went back to happily playing with the ball. That afternoon, as Lucy cleaned the ground floor corridors, her mind kept returning to the strange encounter. Why had Richard Montgomery, the man known as the Ice Storm among his employees and competitors, shown a flicker of humanity with her daughter? What did it mean? Was it just a moment of weakness from someone constantly covered in emotional armor, or was something deeper happening? Around 3 in the afternoon, while taking another break to feed Sophia, Lucy received some disturbing news from Martha. "Miss Camilla is on her way here," her colleague whispered, referring to Richard's fiancée. Sebastian just got a call from her. It seems someone told her about the baby. Lucy felt her blood run cold. Camilla Vance, 36, a renowned corporate lawyer and Richard's fiancée for 2 years, was known among the staff for her difficult temperament and absurd demands. When is she arriving? Any minute now. And from what I gather, she is not happy at all. Lucy hugged Sophia, who had just fallen asleep after her bottle. The gears in her mind worked frantically, trying to anticipate the problems to come. What should I do, Martha? Hide Sophia, go home. Her colleague shook her head. I don't think there's any point. If Mr. Richard authorized it, only he can take it back. The problem is Miss Camilla has a lot of influence over him. The sound of high heels clicking against the marble hallway announced Camilla Vance's arrival before she even appeared. Lucy, who had just placed Sophia in the crib for a nap, felt her heart race. She seriously considered hiding in the attached bathroom, but knew it would be futile and childish. Where is she? Camilla's shrill voice echoed down the corridor. I want to see this employee and the child she brought into the mansion. Now. Lucy took a deep breath, straightened her uniform and went to the door. In the hallway, Camilla was advancing like a storm. Tall, thin, with perfectly styled black hair in a bob cut, she wore a red power suit that looked like it was straight out of a fashion magazine. Her angular face, normally beautiful, was twisted in an expression of fury that accentuated every fine line she tried to conceal with expensive cosmetic procedures. You, she exclaimed upon seeing Lucy. You're the cleaner who had the audacity to turn my fiancé's mansion into a daycare. Sebastian followed close behind, looking uncomfortable. Mrs. Gable appeared at the end of the hall, drawn by the commotion. Miss Camilla, Lucy began, keeping her voice low so as not to wake Sophia. I understand your concern, but it was Mr. Richard who authorized. I don't care. Camilla cut in, getting so close that Lucy could smell her expensive perfume. Richard is going through a difficult period with his new ventures. He's stressed. He's not thinking clearly. He would never allow this under normal circumstances. But he did allow it, Lucy said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. And he assured me it's temporary, just until I find another solution for my daughter's care. Camilla's dark, cold eyes narrowed dangerously. What are you implying? That you know my fiancé's wishes better than I do? Sebastian cleared his throat, intervening cautiously. Miss Camilla, if I may, Mr. Richard did indeed authorize the child's presence. He even ordered the reopening of the old nursery to accommodate her. The color drained from Camilla's face. He what? Her voice was little more than an incredulous whisper. The nursery, that room? Yes, ma'am, Sebastian confirmed, clearly uncomfortable. For a moment, Camilla seemed genuinely stunned, as if she had been physically struck. Lucy realized there was much more to her reaction than simple annoyance. This is unacceptable, Camilla muttered, more to herself than to the others. Then, regaining her composure, she pointed a perfectly manicured finger at Lucy. You don't know what you're playing with, girl. I have no idea what game you're trying to play, but I'm warning you it won't work. I'm not playing any games, Lucy replied, feeling a rising indignation. I'm just a mother trying to do what's best for my daughter without losing my job. The sound of a door opening interrupted the argument. Sophia, awakened by the commotion, began to cry inside the room. Without a second thought, Lucy turned her back on Camilla and went in to tend to her daughter. Don't you turn your back on me, Camilla shouted, following her into the room. But upon crossing the threshold, the lawyer froze. Her eyes slowly scanned every detail of the room. The antique wooden crib, the shelves with children's books, the rocking chair, the delicate mobile hanging from the ceiling. A whirlwind of emotions crossed her face as she watched Lucy pick Sophia up, rocking her gently to calm her down. This room, Camilla murmured, her voice suddenly devoid of its earlier aggression. Helen decorated every detail. Lucy didn't reply, focused on calming Sophia, who was gradually stopping her crying. Richard never let anyone in here. Not even me, Camilla continued, almost to herself. Then, as if waking from a trance, her expression hardened again. I want you and that child out of this house today. I'll speak to Richard as soon as he gets here. There's no need to wait, my dear. I'm here. Everyone turned to the door. Richard was standing on the threshold, hands in his suit pockets, his face as impassive as ever. But there was something different in his posture, a controlled tension that hadn't been there that morning. "Richard!" Camilla exclaimed, rushing to embrace him. He accepted the hug without reciprocating, his eyes fixed on Lucy and Sophia. "Thank goodness you're here. We need to talk about this absurd situation." "What absurd situation would that be?" he asked, his tone calm but firm. Camilla pulled back slightly, studying her fiancé's face intently. This cleaner bringing her daughter to the mansion. And worse, using the room that I designated for temporary use, Richard completed. "It was my decision, Camilla. Lucy was facing a problem that would affect her productivity. I found a practical solution." Camilla looked as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. "But Richard, this room... You never let anyone answer?" "I am perfectly aware of which room this is and what it represents," he interrupted, with a coldness that made Camilla take a step back. "And I decide who enters it and when?" A heavy silence fell over the room. Sebastian and Mrs. Gable exchanged nervous glances. Lucy, still holding Sophia, kept her eyes down, wishing intensely that she could disappear. "All of you leave," Richard ordered. "I need to speak with my fiancé in private." Lucy hesitated, looking at Sophia. Richard noticed her concern. "You can take your daughter, Lucy. Go back to your work. We will discuss this later." "Yes, sir." She quickly gathered Sophia's bag and left the room, followed by Sebastian and Mrs. Gable, who closed the door behind them. In the hallway, the three of them exchanged tense looks. "You'd best continue with your work," Sebastian suggested in a low voice. "I will remain nearby in case it's necessary." Lucy nodded, adjusting Sophia on her hip. "Could I leave her with you for a bit, Mrs. Gable? I need to finish cleaning the downstairs." The housekeeper held out her arms for the baby. "Of course, dear. I'll take her to the kitchen with me. It's time for the afternoon snack. I can make her some fruit puree." "Thank you," Lucy whispered, handing over her daughter in the bag. Before walking away, she cast a worried glance at the closed nursery door, from where muffled voices were already beginning to rise. Inside the room, the argument between Richard and Camilla was heating up. "What has gotten into you?" Camilla demanded, pacing back and forth. "First you allow an employee to bring her child to work. Then you reopen this room you swore you'd never set foot in again, and now you contradict me in front of the staff." Richard remained motionless, watching her with that glacial stare that usually intimidated even the most confident executives. "I don't like your tone, Camilla. And I don't like your actions," she retorted. "This isn't you, Richard. Since when do you care about a cleaner's personal problems? Since when do you let a stranger's child use the room you prepared for your own son?" The mention of the son he never had made something shift in Richard's gaze. For an instant the mask of coldness wavered, revealing a pain so profound that Camilla almost regretted her words. "Don't speak of what you don't understand," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Then explain it to me," she asked, softening her tone. "Because I really don't understand, Richard. You are the most disciplined and demanding man I know. Your rules are unbreakable. Why make an exception now? Why for her?" Richard walked to the window, looking out at the garden. For a long moment he said nothing. "She reminded me of Helen," he finally answered, so quietly Camilla almost didn't hear. "What?" "Not physically," he clarified, still with his back to her, "but the determination, the dignity in the face of adversity. Helen was like that too, strong, resilient, and the child—" He paused. "The child has expressive eyes, like his would have been." Camilla moved closer, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Richard, I understand you're still grieving for Helen and the baby. We all do. But that was 5 years ago. And this sudden empathy for an employee and her daughter, it's not healthy." Richard turned to face her. "And what would be healthy? To continue as before? Living like a machine, feeling nothing?" "That's not what I said. But it's what you prefer, isn't it?" His voice had an accusatory edge. "You like the cold, calculating Richard Montgomery. The ruthless businessman. The fiancé who doesn't ask questions, who doesn't demand emotional intimacy, who is content with appearances." Camilla's face flushed with anger. "That's unfair. I've been with you for 2 years. I've been your partner, your advisor. I helped rebuild your public image after you shut yourself off from the world." "Exactly. My public image." He took a step back, away from her touch. "That's what matters to you, isn't it? how we look to others. The perfect, successful, envied couple. You never cared about what I really felt. That's not true. I tried, Richard. I tried so many times to get through that wall you built, but you never let me. He studied her for a moment as if seeing her clearly for the first time. Perhaps you're right. Perhaps I never did. But do you know what I realized today? That this wall isn't invincible. It can come down. Camilla felt a shiver of apprehension. Because of a baby? A cleaner. Because of an unexpected gesture that made me feel something again, he corrected. Something besides emptiness and obligation. And what did you feel exactly? Richard looked away, his gaze fixing on the empty crib. Possibility, he answered after a long pause. The possibility that maybe not all is lost. That maybe I can still be a human. Camilla stepped forward, holding his face between her hands. You are human, Richard. You're just a man who has suffered a great deal and closed himself off. I understand that. But there are other ways to find your humanity again. We could think about having our own child. Starting our own family. Richard gently removed her hands. That's not what I want, Camilla, not now. And I think you know that. Her eyes filled with frustrated tears. What do you want, then? Time, space, the freedom to find out who I am now. And me? Where do I fit into all of this? He looked at her with something close to compassion. Exactly where you've always wanted to be, beside the Richard Montgomery the world knows. Except I'm not sure I'm that person anymore. The argument continued for a few more minutes, with Camilla alternating between emotional appeals and veiled threats. Finally, she left the room, promising that this conversation wasn't over and that she would be back the next day when Richard was more rational. When he was finally alone, Richard sat in the rocking chair, letting the silence of the room envelop him. For the first time in 5 years, he allowed himself to relive memories he had kept under lock and key, Helen choosing every decorative detail, debating baby names, planning their future. The dream that had ended abruptly one September dawn, with an ambulance rushing doctors and 2 hearts that stopped beating. Since then, Richard had transformed. He had thrown himself into his work, cut off friends, become obsessive with control and discipline. His life was meticulously organized to eliminate any room for emotion. Even his relationship with Camilla followed strict rules, more like a strategic alliance than a romance. But that morning had changed something. The sight of Sophia, a baby in a colorful dress sitting on the floor with her innocent smile and curious eyes, had cracked the armor he had built around his heart. And the most frightening part, a part of him was grateful for it. The sound of light footsteps in the hall interrupted his thoughts. The door, which had been left ajar after Camilla's stormy exit, revealed Lucy standing hesitantly on the threshold. "I'm sorry, Mr. Richard. I didn't mean to interrupt. I just came to check if everything was in order." He realized he must have been sitting there longer than he thought. The sky outside was already beginning to darken, signaling the end of the afternoon. "Come in, Lucy," he said, rising from the chair. "Everything is in order, yes." She entered cautiously, looking around as if searching for signs of the heated argument that had taken place there. "Sophia is with Mrs. Gable in the kitchen," she informed him. "I hope there wasn't any trouble because of this. I can get her and take her somewhere else if you'd prefer." "That won't be necessary," Richard replied, walking to the window. "As I said this morning, the decision to allow your daughter to stay here temporarily was mine. I stand by my word, even with Ms. Camilla being upset?" The question slipped out before Lucy could stop it. She immediately regretted her boldness. To her surprise, Richard didn't seem offended. "Even so," he confirmed, turning to face her. "This is my house. I decide what happens here." Lucy nodded, relieved. "Thank you, sir. I promise I'll keep looking for another solution. I don't want to cause any trouble." "Your daughter is not a problem, Lucy," he said in a tone that surprised her with its softness. "In fact, she's quite refreshing." A strange but not uncomfortable silence settled between them. Lucy realized that, for the first time since she started working at the mansion, she was having a genuine conversation with her boss. Not orders being given, not reports being presented, but a real exchange of words. She really liked the room, she commented, trying to keep the dialogue going. Especially the mobile with the stars and moon. She just stares at it, fascinated. A faint smile, the first Lucy had ever seen on his face, curved Richard's lips. "Helen picked it out herself on a trip we took to Paris. She said our son needed to dream of the stars from an early age." The mention of Helen and their unborn son surprised Lucy. Everyone in the E.E. mansion knew that was a forbidden topic. "She must have been a very special woman," she said sincerely. "She was," Richard agreed, his gaze distant for a moment. Then, as if realizing he'd said too much, he straightened his posture. "It's getting late. Your shift is ending. Go get your daughter and go home to rest." "Yes, sir." Lucy hesitated at the door. "Tomorrow. Can I bring her again tomorrow?" Richard looked at her for a long moment. "Yes, Lucy, bring her. This room was made for a child. Till its time it served its purpose." As she walked down the stairs toward the kitchen, Lucy tried to process what was happening. In less than a day, her view of Richard Montgomery had been completely transformed. The man everyone feared, the demanding and cold boss, had shown a sensitivity that no one suspected existed. In the kitchen, she found a surprising scene. Sophia sitting on the counter, surrounded by smiling staff members, including Mrs. Gable, Martha, and even the young gardener. Paul. They were all making funny faces to entertain the baby, who was giggling with delight at the attention. "I've never seen this little girl stop smiling," Martha commented upon noticing Lucy's arrival. "She's like a ray of sunshine, lighting up everywhere she goes." "It's true," Paul agreed. "And did you see how tightly she holds on when you give her your finger? She's going to be a determined girl." The next morning, Lucy arrived earlier than usual. The night had been restless, filled with confusing dreams where Richard and Camilla argued in a constantly shifting room, while Sophia played obliviously on a rug that was sometimes made of clouds, sometimes of thorns. She woke up exhausted, but determined to make the most of the temporary opportunity fate had given her. This time, there was no need to hide Sophia upon arrival. Sebastian was waiting for her at the back gate, with an expression that, while still formal, seemed slightly softer than usual. "Good morning, Lucy," he greeted her, opening the gate. His gaze fell to Sophia, who was awake and observing everything with curious eyes. "Good morning, little Sophia." "Good morning, Mr. Sebastian," Lucy replied, surprised by the cordiality. "Is it all right for us to take Sophia to the room again?" The butler nodded, adjusting his glasses. "Mr. Richard left clear instructions before he left this morning. The room is at your disposal for as long as necessary." As they walked through the mansion's corridors, Lucy noticed something different in the atmosphere. The staff members they encountered, instead of casting critical or confused glances as they had the day before, now smiled and gave little waves to Sophia. Some even stopped to make funny faces, coaxing giggles from the little one. "It seems your daughter has won over the house," Sebastian commented, his tone neutral but not disapproving. "She has that effect on people," Lucy replied proudly. "Even on Mr. Richard, apparently." Sebastian gave her a sideways glance. "Especially on Mr. Richard, I would say." When they reached the nursery, Lucy was surprised to find it even more welcoming than the day before. There were new toys, a music box on the shelf, and what appeared to be a baby monitoring system installed discreetly in the corner. Mr. Richard ordered some improvements, Sebastian explained, noticing her astonishment. "This is a state-of-the-art monitor. It's connected to an app on his phone so he can check if little Sophia is all right even when he's in his office." Lucy blinked, stunned. He wants to monitor my daughter?" "Apparently," Sebastian replied, allowing himself an almost smile. He said it was for security reasons, but if I may make an observation, I have never seen him so interested in anyone's security, except perhaps Mrs. Helen's. After settling Sophia, who immediately took an interest in the new toys, Lucy went to change and start her work. The day passed smoothly, with frequent visits to the room to check on her daughter, who was always being watched over by a staff member. Mrs. Gable, Martha, and even Paul took turns, apparently charmed by the mansion's little visitor. Around noon, while cleaning the living room windows, Lucy saw Richard's car pulling through the main gates. He had left early for meetings, according to Sebastian. What surprised her was seeing him drive directly to the front entrance of the house, instead of heading to the office at the back of the property, as he usually did when returning during work hours. Minutes later, while she was still trying to understand this break in routine, Lucy heard Sebastian's voice behind her. Mr. Richard requests your presence in the nursery. Lucy, feeling a wave of apprehension, she dropped her cleaning cloth and followed the butler. Had a problem arisen? Had Sophia done something wrong? Upon reaching the room, the scene she found left her momentarily speechless. Richard Montgomery, the powerful businessman always impeccably dressed in tailored suits, was sitting on the rug, his suit jacket carefully folded over the rocking chair. Sophia was in front of him, laughing as she tried to reach a gold pocket watch he was dangling before her. "You sent for me, sir?" Lucy asked, still unable to believe what she was seeing. Richard looked up but didn't get up. "Yes, Lucy. I wanted to inform you that I'll need the office this afternoon for an important video conference. As the sound might disturb Sophia, I suggest you take her to the back garden during that time. Sebastian will prepare a suitable space with shade and comfort." "Of course, sir. Thank you for the warning." She expected him to stand up, put his jacket back on, and return to being the distant businessman everyone knew. Instead, Richard remained seated, watching Sophia, who had now managed to grab the watch and was examining it with childish curiosity. "It's a family heirloom," he said, without taking his eyes off the baby. "It's over 100 years old. It belonged to my grandfather, then my father, and now me. No one but me has touched it in decades." Lucy held her breath. That watch, she knew, was practically a legend among the staff. Sebastian had once mentioned that Richard wouldn't even let antique watch experts handle it during regular maintenance. "She won't break or scratch it, sir. I can take it back if you prefer." "No," he replied, surprising her. "Let her play. It's just an object after all, and she seems fascinated by the ticking." Sophia, as if to confirm, shook the watch and laughed at the sound it made. "Have you had lunch, Lucy?" Richard asked, finally looking at her. "No, sir. I usually have a quick packed lunch on my break, which is in about half an hour." Richard nodded. "Mrs. Gable prepared a special soup today. Vegetable and beef. It's the same recipe that—" He hesitated. "It's an old family recipe. I asked her to save some for Sophia. I thought it would be nutritious for her. You should try some too." Are you inviting me to eat the house food?" Lucy asked, incredulous. "I'm suggesting your daughter deserves more than industrial jarred baby food," he corrected, but without coldness. "And you need to keep your energy up to work properly." Before Lucy could reply, they heard hurried footsteps in the hallway. The door burst open, revealing Camilla, even more elegant and intimidating than the day before, in a navy blue sheath dress and heels that made her seem even taller. Her eyes scanned the scene, Richard sitting on the floor, Sophia with the family watch, Lucy standing in the doorway, and her face took on an expression of disbelief. "What is going on here?" Richard, contrary to what Lucy expected, did not scramble to his feet or seem embarrassed. Instead, he replied with disconcerting calm, "I'm getting to know the daughter of an employee who, due to temporary circumstances, is spending the day at the mansion. Is there a problem, Camilla?" The lawyer strode into the room, her heels clicking aggressively against the wooden floor. "A problem?" "You're on the floor, Richard!" "On the floor? Playing with a cleaner's child, and, my God, is that your grandfather's watch? You never let anyone touch it." "Sophia is not a cleaner's child," he replied, finally getting up. "She is Sophia. And yes, this is my grandfather's watch. And as far as I know, it's still my property, which means I get to decide who touches it." The tension in the room was palpable. Lucy quickly moved to Sophia, picking her up and gently taking the watch from her little hands. "Excuse me," she murmured. "I'll take Sophia for lunch and leave you to talk." "No," Richard said, his tone firm but not aggressive. "Stay, Lucy. Camilla and I can talk later. Hey, it's time for Sophia's lunch." Camilla's face twisted in a mixture of anger and disbelief. "You're asking me to wait because the maid's daughter needs to have lunch? Have you gone mad?" "I'm asking you to moderate your tone and your behavior," Richard replied, with a calmness that only intensified the aura of authority around him. "This is my house, Camilla. You are welcome here, but not to make a scene." For a moment, Camilla seemed speechless. Her eyes darted from Richard to Lucy and Sophia, as if trying to solve an incomprehensible puzzle. "What is happening to you?" she finally asked, her voice lower but no less intense. "Since yesterday, it's like you've been replaced by someone else. You're not the Richard I know." "Perhaps you never really knew me," he replied, taking his jacket from the chair. "Or perhaps I'm finally finding myself again." He turned to Lucy. Take Sophia to the kitchen, please. Mrs. Gable is waiting. Lucy nodded, quickly leaving the room with Sophia in her arms. As she went down the stairs, she could hear the argument resume upstairs, this time in more controlled but no less intense tones. In the kitchen, Mrs. Gable was waiting with the promised soup. The delicious aroma filled Lucy's nostrils as she entered. "This is the recipe Mrs. Helen wrote down in that little blue notebook of hers," the housekeeper commented, as she prepared a more pureed version for Sophia. "Mr. Richard specifically asked for this soup today, the first time in 5 years. Lucy sat Sophia in the improvised high chair the staff had adapted. "It seems a lot of things are happening for the first time in 5 years in this house." Mrs. Gable nodded, serving the soup into bowls. "It's as if a spell is being broken, you know, and this little girl is the fairy who's breaking the enchantment." Sophia clapped her little hands happily when she saw the food, as if understanding she was being praised. "I don't know what's happening. Mrs. Gable," Lucy confessed as she helped her daughter with the first spoonfuls. "Mr. Richard was always so distant, and now he's sitting on the floor playing with my daughter, offering the house lunch, contradicting his fiancée." The housekeeper sat at the table with them, something she would never normally do during work hours. "You know what I think? I think he was waiting for this, without knowing it, but waiting. Waiting for what? Just for a reason to start living again. To feel something besides pain." Mrs. Gable watched Sophia eat with enthusiasm. "This girl brought life into a house that has been in mourning for 5 years. And Mr. Richard, who closed himself off more than anyone, is finally feeling that life again." Before Lucy could respond, the kitchen door opened and Richard entered. Everyone instantly tensed, fearing he had overheard their conversation. But surprisingly, he seemed calm, almost relaxed. "Is the soup good?" he asked, approaching the table. "Delicious, sir," Lucy replied. "Sophia is loving it." As if to prove it, the baby clapped her hands on her high chair tray again, letting out a happy squeal. Richard allowed himself a small smile. Helen used to say this soup had healing powers. It was a tradition in her family. Whenever someone was sad or sick, she would make this broth. The fact that he mentioned Helen so openly, and with a smile, caused a silent shock in Mrs. Gable, who almost dropped the spoon she was holding. "After lunch, I'd like you to take Sophia to the garden as I suggested," Richard continued, addressing Lucy. "It's a beautiful day out. Children need sun and fresh air." "Yes, sir?" He hesitated as if he wanted to say something more, but then just nodded and left the kitchen. "Our Lady of Perpetual Help," Mrs. Gable murmured, making the sign of the cross. He smiled, and spoke of Mrs. Helen without looking like he was going to fall apart. "This girl is no fairy, she's an angel." The rest of the lunch passed amidst amazed comments about Richard's transformation and theories about what might have happened with Camilla. Martha, who joined them a few minutes later, revealed that she had seen her leaving the mansion with a face like thunder, walking so fast she nearly twisted her ankle in those heels. After lunch, following Richard's instructions, Lucy took Sophia to the back garden. As promised, Sebastian had prepared a spot in the shade of an old mango tree, with blankets spread on the grass and a few toys. "The gardener has been instructed not to use any noisy equipment in this area today," the butler informed her, indicating the space. "And I had an intercom installed here, in case you need anything." "Thank you, Mr. Sebastian," Lucy said, genuinely touched by the care. The butler adjusted his tie, looking slightly uncomfortable with the gratitude. "I am merely following Mr. Richard's orders." He was meticulous in his instructions for the little one's comfort. As Sophia happily explored the new environment, patting the blankets and trying to catch the leaves that occasionally fell from the tree, Lucy reflected on the strange turn her life had taken. 2 days ago she had been desperate, fearing she would lose her job for having no one to leave her daughter with. Now not only had she been allowed to bring Sophia to the mansion, but her own boss, a man known for his coldness, seemed enchanted by the little one's presence. It was surreal, but at the same time inexplicably right, as if the universe had aligned all the pieces for this moment. Around 3 in the afternoon, while Sophia napped peacefully on the blankets, Lucy noticed movement in the office window that overlooked the garden. Richard was there, watching them. When he noticed he had been seen, he didn't move away, as one might expect. Instead, he gave a small nod and continued to watch for a few more moments before returning to what he was doing. The gesture, simple but significant, sent a shiver down Lucy's spine. Something was changing, not just in Richard but in her too. Something dangerous and unpredictable, like a controlled fire that threatened at any moment to become an untamable conflagration. The rest of the afternoon passed without incident. Sophia, refreshed after her nap, played happily in the garden until the sun began to set. Lucy, who had been excused from some of her regular tasks to care for her daughter, used the time to watch her grow and explore, a rare luxury for a working mother. When it was time to leave, Lucy gathered the toys and prepared to get her things from the locker room. That's when Sebastian appeared again. "Mr. Richard would like to speak with you before you leave," the butler announced. In his office. Feeling a sudden apprehension, Lucy adjusted Sophia on her hip and followed Sebastian to Richard's office. Had he changed his mind? Was this the end of their temporary arrangement? Upon entering the office, she found Richard standing by the window, observing the garden now illuminated by strategically placed lights. "You sent for me, sir?" He turned, his face serious but not stern. "Yes, Lucy. I wanted to inform you that I've made some arrangements regarding your daughter's situation." Lucy's heart tightened. This was it. The end of the dream. Arrangements? Lucy asked, trying to control the tremor in her voice. Sophia, oblivious to the tension, played with a button on her mother's uniform. Richard walked to his desk and picked up a folder. "Yes. First, I've had proper equipment installed in the nursery. A more modern crib, a full changing station, a nursing chair. Second, I've hired a professional nanny to assist when you need to focus on your tasks." Lucy blinked, surprised. You hired a nanny?" "Vanessa Andrews, 42 years old, 15 years of experience, a specialist in child development. She starts tomorrow. She will be paid by the company, not by you," he clarified, handing her the folder. "Here is her resume, and some references my HR department has verified. You can review them for your approval." I don't know what to say," Lucy stammered, accepting the folder with her free hand. "This is very generous, Mr. Richard, but may I ask why?" Richard returned to the window, turning his back to her. For a long moment he remained silent, as if carefully formulating his answer. "In the business world, Lucy, I've learned that efficiency is paramount. A satisfied and worry-free team works better. It's a simple investment with a guaranteed return." He paused. "Besides, Sophia seems to like it here." "It would be cruel to interrupt her adjustment now." Despite the practical explanation, Lucy sensed something more in his voice, a hesitation, a softness that didn't match the calculating businessman. "Thank you, sir, truly. This means so much to us." He turned, facing her directly. "There's one more thing. I've been thinking about implementing a broader policy in the company. A dedicated space for employees' children. A sort of corporate daycare. What do you think of the idea?" "A daycare? At the company? Or here at the mansion? I have enough space. Many of my employees are parents who, like you, face difficulties with childcare. It affects productivity and, more importantly, their quality of life." Lucy felt momentarily speechless. The man before her was unrecognizable compared to the Richard Montgomery everyone had feared just 2 days ago. "I think it's a wonderful idea," she finally replied. "It would change a lot of people's lives." "Good." He nodded, satisfied. "I'll develop the project then. I'd like you to participate as a consultant. After all, the inspiration came from you and Sophia." Sophia, upon hearing her name, let out a little laugh and reached her arms out towards Richard, surprising both her mother and the businessman. "She wants to go to you," Lucy commented, astonished. Richard looked at the child with an unreadable expression. He hesitated for a moment, and then, to Lucy's complete surprise, he extended his arms and took Sophia. The naturalness with which he held the baby, properly supporting her head, adjusting her comfortably against his chest, revealed an unexpected familiarity. "Have you had children, Mr. Richard?" The question slipped out before Lucy could stop it. A flash of pain crossed his eyes, so quick it almost went unnoticed. "No, but I always wanted to." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken meanings. Sophia, content in Richard's arms, played with the knot of his tie. "She likes you," Lucy observed, smiling. "Children are good judges of character," he replied. And for the first time since Lucy had known him, A genuine smile lit up his face. Perhaps she sees something that the adults around me can't. The intimacy of that moment, the three of them there, almost like a family, was simultaneously comforting and alarming. Lucy knew she should take Sophia back, thank him, and leave. It was protocol, the proper distance between boss and employee, but something kept her there, caught in that timeless instant. It was Sebastian who broke the spell, knocking softly on the door and entering after Richard's permission. "Pardon the interruption, sir, but Miss Camilla has just arrived. She seems agitated." Richard sighed, handing Sophia back to Lucy. "Thank you, Sebastian. Tell her I'll be in the living room in a minute." When the butler left, Richard adjusted the tie Sophia had disheveled. "Think about the consultancy offer, Lucy. And tomorrow, when you meet Vanessa, give me your honest opinion. If you don't approve, we'll find another nanny." "Yes, sir. And once again, thank you for everything." He made a dismissive gesture, but not rudely. "You can use the side exit today. It will help you avoid a potentially uncomfortable encounter with Camilla." "I understand. Good night, Mr. Richard." "Good night, Lucy. Good night, Sophia." On the way home, lulled by the gentle motion of the bus, Lucy tried to organize her whirlwind of thoughts. 2 nights ago, she had gone to bed fearing the future, not knowing how she would care for Sophia while working. Now, she was returning home with a folder containing the resume of a professional nanny hired especially for her daughter and an offer to be a consultant on a corporate daycare project. It was too surreal to be true. And even more surreal was the way her heart raced when she remembered Richard's smile, the care with which he held Sophia, the softness in his voice when he spoke of her daughter. "What am I thinking?" she murmured to herself, shaking her head. "He's my boss. A millionaire. He's engaged to a beautiful, sophisticated woman. This isn't a fairy tale, Lucy. It's just a man trying to reclaim his humanity." But no matter how many times she repeated it to herself, she couldn't erase the image of Richard holding Sophia against his chest, smiling as if he had rediscovered a lost part of himself. The next morning, upon arriving at the mansion, Lucy was met by a strange atmosphere. The staff were talking in small groups, exchanging glances and whispers that ceased as soon as she approached. "What's going on?" she asked Paul, the gardener, who seemed less reserved than the others. He glanced around before answering. "There was a big fight last night. Miss Camilla and Mr. Richard. They say even the neighbors heard the yelling." "About what?" Paul shrugged. "Who knows? But I'd bet it has something to do with little Sophia. Miss Camilla stormed out of here, slammed the door and screeched away in her car. And Mr. Richard, well, Sebastian says he spent the whole night in his office, working. Didn't sleep a wink." Lucy felt a tightness in her chest. This was it, the end of the arrangement. Richard had probably reflected on it, realized the absurdity of the situation, and given in to Camilla's pressure. Today would be the day he reverted to being the cold, distant boss, and she would be dismissed for causing trouble. With this grim thought, she headed for the nursery, mentally preparing herself to find it locked again, with Sebastian waiting to inform her that the experiment was over. Instead, as she turned the corner, she was met with a completely unexpected scene. Richard, in his shirt sleeves, something she had never seen before, was on his knees on the floor of the room, apparently assembling a child's swing. "Mr. Richard?" she called, unsure if she should interrupt. He looked up, and Lucy immediately noticed the deep, dark circles under his eyes. Paul was right, he hadn't slept. "Ah, Lucy, good morning. I'm almost finished here." He stood up, wiping his hands on a cloth. "It's a swing imported from Sweden. They say it stimulates balance and motor coordination in babies Sophia's age. You're assembling it yourself." Richard looked at the swing, then back at her, as if only now realizing how unusual the scene was. "Yes, well, there are certain things I prefer to do myself, to ensure they're done perfectly." Lucy didn't know what to say. Every day Richard surprised her more. The metamorphosis from the cold, calculating man to this human being who assembled a swing with his own hands was almost incomprehensible. "Vanessa will arrive at noon," he continued, returning to a professional tone. "I'd like you to be here to meet her and explain Sophia's routines. And about the corporate daycare project, I've scheduled a preliminary meeting for Monday. If you could prepare some notes on the basic needs for such a space, I'd appreciate it." Of course, sir. I'll do that. He nodded but didn't move to leave. Instead, he stood there watching her with an intensity that made her blush. Lucy, he said finally, his voice softer, about last night. You don't need to explain anything, Mr. Richard, she hurried to say. Your personal life is none of my business. Perhaps not, but considering you and Sophia were the catalyst for the argument, I feel I owe you some explanation. Lucy swallowed hard, holding Sophia a little tighter. I'm sorry if we caused problems in your relationship. Don't be sorry, he replied with surprising firmness. Camilla and I have fundamentally different views on many things. The situation with you and Sophia just brought those differences to the surface. It was clarifying. Before Lucy could respond, Sophia reached her little arms toward Richard, letting out the happy squeals she always made when she was excited. May I? He asked, extending his arms. Of course. Richard took Sophia with the same naturalness as the day before. The baby immediately began playing with the button on his shirt. She likes buttons, Lucy commented, smiling. At home I have a box full of them that I collect from old clothes. She'll play for hours. Interesting. Perhaps I can get some different types to enrich her collection. He watched Sophia for a moment thoughtfully. You know, when I'm with her, I feel something I haven't felt in a very long time. A kind of clarity, as if the world makes sense again. The statement, so personal and vulnerable, caught Lucy by surprise. It was as if a wall had crumbled, revealing the real man behind the corporate facade. Children have that effect, she replied softly. They bring us back to the basics, to what really matters. Exactly. Richard nodded as if she had articulated precisely what he felt. And that's what Camilla doesn't understand. For her, what matters is appearance, social standing, what other people think. She sees Sophia as a threat to the image we've built. And you? How do you see my daughter? Richard looked at the baby in his arms, who had now managed to unbutton one of his buttons and was laughing, delighted with her achievement. I see her as a reminder that there's more to life than financial statements and corporate acquisitions, that I can still feel something beyond obligation and duty. He paused. That maybe it's not too late for me. The vulnerability of that moment was almost palpable. Lucy felt an almost irresistible urge to touch his face, to tell him that it was never too late to start over. But she held back. There were lines that shouldn't be crossed, no matter how blurred they were becoming. The moment was interrupted by a knock on the door. Sebastian entered, looking slightly uncomfortable. Pardon the interruption, sir, but there is a situation that requires your attention. What kind of situation, Sebastian? The butler hesitated, glancing at Lucy. A journalist, sir. Diane Evans from the NYC Insider portal. She's at the gate claiming she received a tip about the presence of a child in the mansion. Apparently someone took photos of you with little Sophia in the garden yesterday. Richard's face hardened instantly. Who would have done that? The garden is private property. The photos seem to have been taken from a high angle, sir, possibly from one of the mansion's windows. A heavy silence fell over the room. The implication was clear. Someone from the house had leaked the photos. Someone with access to the upper floors. Camilla, Richard muttered, more to himself than to the others. Lucy felt a chill. Sophia, sensing the change in atmosphere, stopped playing and looked up at Richard's face with curiosity. What does she want? Richard asked Sebastian. A statement, sir. About the child, about why she's here, about you reopening the room you prepared for. The butler stopped, giving his boss a meaningful look. It seems she has quite specific information, sir. Richard closed his eyes for a moment, as if gathering his strength. When he opened them again, his expression was resolute. I'll speak with her. In the garden. Prepare coffee and water. He turned to Lucy. You're coming with me. With Sophia. If they're going to speculate about us, let them see the truth with their own eyes. Sir, are you sure? Sebastian asked, genuinely concerned. Ms. Camilla will not like this, and the press could twist everything. I'm tired of worrying about what Camilla will or will not like, Sebastian. And as for the press, he looked at Sophia, who had gone back to playing with his button. Perhaps it's time the world knew that Richard Montgomery is, after all, human. 20 minutes later, they were seated in the garden. Richard in the main chair, Lucy beside him in another, with Sophia playing peacefully on a blanket between them. Diane Evans, A woman in her early 30s with red-framed glasses and a notepad watched them with obvious curiosity. "So, Mr. Montgomery," she began after the formal introductions, "could you explain who this adorable child is and why she is in your mansion?" Richard, who had resumed his professional demeanor, though without the usual coldness, answered calmly. "This is Sophia, daughter of Lucy Peterson, a member of my domestic staff. Due to temporary circumstances involving childcare, I authorized Sophia to remain at the mansion during her mother's work hours." "And isn't this arrangement a bit unusual for someone with your reputation?" "The market knows Richard Montgomery as a man inflexible with rules and procedures. The market knows only one facet of who I am. Ms. Evans, like all of us, I am multidimensional." The journalist smiled, clearly intrigued by the answer. "Sources claim you reopened a specific room to accommodate Sophia, a room that has been closed for 5 years, since the loss of your wife Helen, who was pregnant at the time. Is this true?" The direct question about Helen and their unborn baby was clearly a provocation, an attempt to destabilize him. Lucy tensed, expecting the explosion of anger that was sure to come. Instead, Richard responded with surprising serenity. "Yes, it is true. The room was originally prepared for my son, who was never born. Keeping it closed for 5 years was my way of dealing with grief. Reopening it now for Sophia was a conscious decision. Rooms are meant to house life, not to preserve absence." Richard's statement brought a momentary silence to the garden. Even Diane, with all her journalistic experience, seemed touched by the unexpected sincerity. "That's a rather poetic perspective, Mr. Montgomery," she finally commented, adjusting her glasses. "Not the kind of answer we're used to associating with the man known as the real estate calculator. Perhaps it's time to revise those labels, don't you think?" he replied with a faint smile. Sophia, as if sensing it was her moment to intervene, crawled over to Richard and tugged on his trouser leg, raising her arms in a clear request to be picked up. Without hesitation, he lifted her onto his lap. The discreet click of the journalist's camera captured the moment, but Richard didn't seem to mind. "And what about your relationship with Camilla Vance?" Diane asked, changing tactics. "Sources indicate she does not approve of this arrangement with the child. Was there really a heated argument last night, as rumored?" Lucy felt her stomach drop. That question could easily lead to an uncomfortable exposure of her position in the mansion. She was about to intervene to say she needed to take Sophia for a diaper change, anything to interrupt the conversation's direction, when Richard answered with unnerving calm. "My personal relationship with Camilla is undergoing re-evaluation, as happens in any adult partnership when priorities shift. I won't comment on private discussions, but I can say that Sophia," he looked at the baby on his lap, "has brought significant changes to my worldview and my values. Not everyone adapts easily to change." "And what about Ms. Peterson?" The journalist turned to Lucy. "What has it been like for you, a single mother, to work in an environment where your daughter is so welcomed by your boss?" Lucy swallowed hard, suddenly feeling like the center of attention. "It's been a blessing, to be honest. I was desperate when my caregiver had to travel and the daycare closed. Mr. Montgomery turned a problem into a solution that benefits not only me and Sophia, but apparently him as well." "And what solution would that be exactly?" Diane pressed, her sharp gaze moving between Lucy and Richard. "A corporate daycare," Richard answered before Lucy could elaborate. "Sophia has inspired a project we're developing, a care facility for the children of all Montgomery Holdings employees. Lucy will be a special consultant on the project." The surprise on Diane's face was evident. "That's unexpected and quite progressive for a traditionally conservative company like yours." "Sometimes we need a small catalyst to see the obvious," Richard said, adjusting Sophia, who was now playing with his tie. "This child made me see that our corporate policies were ignoring a fundamental reality. Employees are people with full lives, not just productive resources." The interview continued for another 15 minutes, with Richard answering questions about the details of the daycare project, his vision for the company's future, and occasionally sharing little stories about how Sophia had conquered the mansion in recent days. When Diane finally left, promising to send a copy of the article before publication, Lucy and Richard remained seated in the garden, her comfortable silence between them. Do you realize what you've just done? Lucy finally asked. You've completely transformed your public image in a single interview. Richard watched Sophia, who had fallen asleep on his lap. It wasn't planned that way, but perhaps it was necessary. For a long time I cultivated the image of the ruthless man, the heartless negotiator. It was easier. It kept people at a distance. And now? He raised his gaze to meet hers. Now it seems a certain 11-month-old young lady has decided it's time to tear down those barriers. The moment of connection between them was shattered by the screeching sound of a car braking sharply at the mansion's entrance. Seconds later, Camilla's agitated voice echoed across the garden. Richard, where are you? What have you done? Sebastian appeared quickly, trying to calm the lawyer, but she brushed past him, storming across the garden like a hurricane in a flawless red suit. When she saw Richard sitting with a sleeping Sophia on his lap and Lucy beside him, she stopped abruptly, as if she had hit an invisible wall. So it's true, she said, her voice trembling with fury. You actually gave an interview. You talked about Helen, about the baby, about us. You exposed our private life to a gossip journalist. Camilla, Richard replied, keeping his voice low so as not to wake Sophia. This is neither the time nor the place. Sophia is sleeping. Sophia, 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 Camilla exploded, completely ignoring his request for discretion. That's all you've talked about for 3 days. A child that isn't even yours, the daughter of a cleaner who appeared out of nowhere. What is wrong with you? Lucy felt her face burn with shame and anger. Sophia, startled by the noise, woke with a jolt and began to cry. Now look what you've done, Richard said, standing up with the baby in his arms, trying to soothe her. You frightened her. Camilla looked at the scene. Richard cradling Sophia, Lucy standing by his side, and let out a bitter laugh. This is pathetic. Are you living out some kind of fantasy? Playing house with the maid and her baby? Is this some delayed psychotic break over what happened with Helen? Enough! Richard's voice cut through the air like a whip, yet he still held Sophia gently nestled. Do not speak of them like that. Nor of Helen. You don't have that right. And you don't have the right to humiliate me publicly, to break off our engagement without even a direct conversation. Lucy's eyes widened. Break off the engagement. Camilla turned on her, her face contorted with fury. Don't play innocent. I know exactly what's going on here. You saw a rich, vulnerable man, and you found the perfect way to manipulate him. That's absurd, Lucy replied, trembling with indignation. I would never... Save your act for him, Camilla cut in. I know your type. The suffering single mother, fighting against all odds, the adorable baby as the perfect bait. A classic gold digger move, updated for modern times. Richard took a step forward, his expression harder than Lucy had ever seen it. Take back what you said, Camilla, now. Or what? She challenged. Are you going to fire me too? Like you did with our relationship. Through a damn interview for a gossip blog? I didn't end our relationship in an interview. I simply said we are re-evaluating priorities, which everyone will interpret as it's over. And you know why? Because that's exactly what it is. It was over the moment you allowed this woman and her child into your life. The moment you reopened that damned room, we spent 2 years trying to make you forget. Sophia continued to cry, frightened by the shouting. Lucy held out her arms. Let me take her, Mr. Richard. She's scared. He hesitated for a moment, as if unwilling to hand over the child, but then nodded, carefully transferring Sophia into her mother's arms. Take her inside, Lucy. Sebastian will accompany you. I need to handle this in private. Yes, sir. She cast one last worried look at Richard before following Sebastian towards the house. In the kitchen, she found Mrs. Gable and Martha, both with apprehensive expressions. They had clearly heard part of the argument. Good heavens, the housekeeper murmured, making the sign of the cross. Miss Camilla is beside herself. That's putting it mildly, Lucy agreed, still trembling as she calmed Sophia. She practically accused me of being a gold digger. Martha made a sound of indignation. How absurd! As if you planned any of this. That's desperation talking, commented Mrs. Gable, putting a kettle on to boil. She's losing the control she always had over him. And the worst part is, it wasn't because of anything you did intentionally. What do you mean? Lucy asked, accepting the chair Paul pulled out for her. Oh, my dear, don't you see? The housekeeper smiled sadly. It was simply by being who you are, a dedicated, hard-working mother with no games or ulterior motives, and your daughter, being a pure and innocent child. That touched something in Mr. Richard that Miss Camilla, with all her sophistication and strategies, could never reach. Lucy looked down at Sophia, who was finally calming down in her lap. I never wanted to cause trouble. I was just desperate because I had nowhere to leave her. Sometimes, said Sebastian, surprising everyone with his philosophical intervention, the greatest moments of transformation begin with a simple act of desperation. The ensuing silence was broken by the sound of the front door, slamming violently. Moments later, firm footsteps echoed down the hall, and Richard appeared at the kitchen doorway. For the first time since they had known him, he looked truly exhausted, not just physically but emotionally. His tie was loose, his jacket removed, and there was an expression in his eyes that none of them had ever seen. Sir? Sebastian called out, concerned. Richard looked at each of them until his gaze settled on Lucy and Sophia. It's over, he said simply. Are you all right, sir? Asked Mrs. Gable, stepping forward with a cup of tea. He accepted the drink mechanically, not really registering the gesture. I don't know, different. Would you like to speak in private, sir? Sebastian offered. To everyone's surprise, Richard shook his head. No, there's no longer a need for formalities or separations. Not here. Not now. He pulled out a chair and sat down heavily at the kitchen table, something he had never done before. Camilla is out of my life, for good. A respectful silence fell over the kitchen. No one knew quite what to say or how to react to this version of Richard Montgomery. Vulnerable, open, sitting among them as an equal. It was Sophia who broke the impasse, reaching her little arms towards him and letting out a string of happy babbles, as if trying to console him in her own baby language. A tired but genuine smile curved Richard's lips. At least someone here isn't shocked by the situation. Children have a wisdom we lose over time, Lucy commented softly. He nodded, watching Sophia. You know what was most revealing in that conversation with Camilla? I realized I never truly loved her. It was convenient, practical, socially appropriate. We made an agreement. We didn't build a relationship. The frankness of the confession surprised everyone. Mrs. Gable and Martha exchanged meaningful glances. Sebastian adjusted his tie, clearly uncomfortable with the level of intimacy. Paul pretended to be busy with something at the sink, giving his boss privacy. But Lucy just listened, her eyes fixed on Richard's. After Helen, he continued, as if speaking mainly to Lucy, I convinced myself I didn't need to feel anymore, that I could live in a controlled, predictable world where emotions were inconveniences to be avoided. Camilla fit perfectly into that arrangement. She wasn't interested in vulnerability or real connection either. We wanted the same thing, the perfect appearance of a relationship without the messy complications of actually caring. And now? Lucy asked, unable to stop herself. Richard looked away for a moment, contemplating the teacup in his hands. Now I realize I was just surviving, not living. And I can't go back to that existence anymore. A ringing phone interrupted the conversation. It was Richard's. He looked at the screen and sighed. It's Ricardo, my CFO. He's probably already seen the news of the breakup. Or worse, read some distorted version of what happened in the garden. He stood up. I need to handle this. Business goes on even when personal lives fall apart. Before leaving, however, he stopped beside Lucy. Vanessa will be here in an hour. Please feel free to interview her and see if she's a good fit for Sophia. If not, we'll find someone else. He hesitated, then added, and Lucy, thank you. For what? For reminding me that I'm still human. With that, he left, leaving a silence charged with meaning in the kitchen. Well, said Martha finally, if someone had told me a week ago that I'd see Richard Montgomery sitting at the kitchen table, venting about his failed relationship and thanking an employee for reminding him he's still human, I would have said they were completely crazy. Mrs. Gable shook her head, amazed. Miracles happen every day, my dear. Some are grand, like the curing of a disease. Others are quiet, like the thawing of a frozen heart. In the weeks that followed, the Montgomery mansion transformed in ways no one could have predicted. The corporate daycare project moved forward quickly, with Lucy actively participating in the planning. A space on the mansion's ground floor was designated as a pilot area, named the Sunshine Corner. equipped with everything children of different ages might need. Employees who had once hidden their difficulties with their children began to bring them, first shyly, then with growing confidence. The mansion, which for years had been a place of oppressive silence and rigid formality, now occasionally echoed with children's laughter. Richard, surprisingly, seemed to flourish in this new environment. The staff noticed subtle but significant changes. He smiled more. His rigid posture relaxed and his tone of voice lost the sharp coldness everyone had feared. In meetings, he began asking about executives' families, showing genuine interest in their answers. Some longtime employees commented that he was reverting to the man he was before Helen's loss. Not exactly the same, but a wiser, more compassionate version. The relationship between Richard and Lucy also evolved, though they both maintained a cautious professional distance. He consulted her regularly on the daycare project, valuing her practical opinions as a working mother. She, in turn, began to see him not as the fearsome boss, but as a complex man struggling to rediscover his humanity. And Sophia became the undisputed darling of the mansion. Even the most serious staff members melted at her smile. But it was with Richard that she had the most surprising connection. Whenever he entered a room where she was, her little eyes would light up, and she would immediately crawl or reach her arms out in his direction. One afternoon, about a month after the incident with Camilla, Lucy found Richard in the garden with Sophia. He had spread a blanket on the lawn and was lying on his stomach, at the baby's level, showing her different types of flowers he had picked. "This is a daisy," he explained patiently, as if Sophia could understand every word. "It represents innocence and purity, and this one here is a rose, a symbol of love and passion. One day when you're older, I'll tell you the story of each flower and what they mean." Lucy remained at a distance, not wanting to interrupt the moment. There was something so natural, so right about the way Richard interacted with her daughter, that she sometimes wondered if the universe hadn't planned it all from the beginning. The sound of her cell phone betrayed her presence. Richard looked up, meeting her gaze, but he didn't seem embarrassed to have been caught in such a vulnerable moment. "We're having a basic botany lesson," he explained with a smile. "Sophia is a very attentive student." Lucy approached, sitting on the edge of the blanket. "She's always loved flowers. At home, we have a little pot of violets on the windowsill. Sometimes I spend minutes just showing them to her, telling her the names of the colors. Violets. They symbolize modesty, virtue, and affection." Richard sat up, adjusting Sophia, who was now trying to grab one of the daisies. "They suit her. And you." The veiled compliment made Lucy blush slightly. "Did you learn all this from books?" "My mother was passionate about gardening," he explained. "She knew the meaning of every flower, every plant. She used to say that flowers speak a language humans have forgotten." "A wise woman." "She would have adored Sophia," Richard commented, watching the baby, who had now managed to pluck some petals from the daisy and was examining them with childish fascination. "And Helen, too." They would have melted at these curious little eyes. Preparations for Sophia's first birthday began 2 weeks before the date. Initially, Lucy had planned a simple celebration in her small apartment in the Bronx, perhaps a cake, some balloons and 2 or 3 friends. But Richard had other plans. "I want to offer the mansion for the party," he said one afternoon, as they watched Sophia trying to take her first steps in the garden, holding onto her mother's hands. "We have the space, the facilities, and everyone here would love to participate." Lucy hesitated. In the last 2 months, since the Sunshine Corner had become a reality, and Sophia's story had become known among the employees of Montgomery Holdings, the line between her professional and personal life had become increasingly blurred. Sophia was no longer just the cleaner's daughter, who temporarily visited the mansion. She was almost a beloved mascot, a presence everyone looked forward to seeing daily. And Richard. Well, Richard had transformed into someone Lucy barely recognized, compared to the cold, distant boss of just a few months ago. He smiled now, not just politely, but with genuine joy. He greeted employees by name. He asked about their families. And, most surprisingly of all, he spent significant time with Sophia whenever he could, reading stories, showing her flowers from the garden, or simply watching her discover the world. "That's very kind of you," she finally replied, "but I don't want to impose. You've already done so much for us." "It's not an imposition," Richard interrupted gently. "It's a sincere wish. Sophia has changed this house, Lucy. She brought life back to a place that was dormant. Celebrating her first year of life here seems appropriate." The look that accompanied those words, intense, vulnerable, almost pleading, made something stir inside her. Lately, these moments had become more frequent, silent exchanges heavy with unspoken meanings, glances that lasted a second longer than appropriate, hands that almost touched when passing objects to one another. "All right," she finally agreed. "But nothing extravagant, please. Just something simple with the people who care about her." The smile that lit up Richard's face made her heart race inexplicably. "Simple but special. I promise." Richard Montgomery's definition of simple, as Lucy would soon discover, differed significantly from most people's. In the days leading up to the birthday, a discreetly efficient team transformed the mansion's kitchen and garden. The decor, while not ostentatious, was clearly high quality. Biodegradable balloons in pastel shades, carefully composed floral arrangements, a dessert table that looked like it was from an artisanal bakery magazine. "This isn't exactly what I'd call simple," Lucy commented on the eve of the party. Observing the final preparations, Richard, who was personally overseeing the assembly of a small wooden carousel in the garden, a handmade toy he had specially commissioned for the occasion, smiled unapologetically. "It's simple by Montgomery standards," he replied. "If I'd left Sebastian in charge, we'd have an international buffet and a symphony orchestra. And probably an elephant for the children to ride," added Sebastian, who was passing by with a checklist. The butler, surprisingly, had been one of the most enthusiastic about the party preparations. "I still think we should have hired that magician from St. Petersburg." Lucy laughed, shaking her head in disbelief. "You two are impossible. Sophia is turning 1, not getting married. She'll probably be more impressed with the wrapping paper than the gifts." "Which is why I ordered special wrapping papers with different textures," Richard replied, with a seriousness that was immediately betrayed by a mischievous grin. On the morning of the birthday, Lucy woke to the sound of a light knock on the door of the room she was occupying in the mansion. Richard had insisted that she and Sophia spend the previous night at the house, to avoid the hassle of travel first thing in the morning. It was the first time they had slept there, in one of the luxurious, rarely used guest rooms. "Good morning," she called out, adjusting the borrowed robe over her pajamas. Sebastian entered, carrying a breakfast tray. Behind him, Mrs. Gable carried a small gift-wrapped box. "Good morning, Lucy," the butler greeted. "Mr. Richard asked that we serve breakfast in your room today. Is little Sophia awake yet?" As if in response, a happy squeal came from the portable crib set up beside the bed. Sophia was standing, holding onto the bars, watching the visitors with bright eyes. "As you can see, she's more than awake," Lucy replied, smiling. Mrs. Gable approached the crib, her normally stern face softened by a genuine smile. "Good morning, birthday princess. Look what Mrs. Gable brought for you to wear today." She handed the box to Lucy, who opened it curiously. Inside was a delicate white dress with lace details, accompanied by a handmade flower headband. "It's beautiful," Lucy murmured, touching the incomparably fine fabric. "But it must have cost a fortune." "It was a gift from Mr. Richard," Sebastian explained. "He chose the style himself, based on an old photo you showed him a few weeks ago. He said Sophia looked like a princess in that picture, with the little red dress." Lucy felt a lump in her throat. She remembered the photo, a simple picture on her phone taken when Sophia was 6 months old, wearing a cheap red dress Lucy had bought on sale. She had shown it to Richard casually during a conversation about how fast children grow. "He remembered that?" she asked, trying to control the emotion in her voice. "Mr. Richard forgets nothing related to you two," Mrs. Gable replied, with a meaningful look. "Now come on, little angel, let's have breakfast and then get ready for your big party." The morning passed in a whirlwind of final preparations. Lucy was helping to arrange the last details on the table when Martha appeared, looking slightly agitated. "Mr. Richard is looking for you," she reported. "He said for you to go to his office as soon as possible." "He seemed nervous." "Nervous?" Lucy repeated, confused. "That's not typical of him." "Nothing has been typical of him these past few months," Martha observed, with a knowing smile. Lucy left Sophia in the care of Vanessa, the nanny who had become an essential part of her routine, and headed to the office. She knocked softly on the door. "Come in," called Richard's familiar voice. He was standing by the window wearing a navy blue suit that looked as if it had been made specifically for the occasion. When he saw her, his face lit up with a smile, but Lucy noticed an underlying tension in his posture. "You sent for me?" "Yes," he replied, gesturing to a chair. "Please sit. I have something for you." "For Sophia, actually. A special birthday gift." Lucy sat curious. "You've already given too many gifts, Richard." "The dress, the party, all of this is different," he interrupted gently. For the first time, Lucy noticed a small velvet box on the desk. "It's something I've been planning for a while." He picked up the box and sat in the chair next to her, rather than behind the desk, as was his custom. The proximity made Lucy's heart race inexplicably. "Before you open this," Richard continued, his voice deeper than usual, "I need to make a confession. When you showed up that first day with Sophia, my order for you to bring your daughter to the mansion wasn't an act of kindness. It was a test." Lucy frowned, confused. "A test?" "Yes, I was asleep, for lack of a better word. Functioning on autopilot for years. When I heard about your problem, something inside me, something I didn't even recognize myself, saw an opportunity. Not to help initially, but to test myself." "I don't understand," Lucy admitted. Richard sighed, running a hand through his hair, a gesture she had never seen him make before Sophia's arrival in their lives. "I wanted to see if I could still feel anything. Lucy, if there was anything beyond the emptiness and coldness I had so carefully cultivated, I ordered you to bring Sophia as a kind of emotional experiment, to see if the presence of a child, something I had always wanted and lost, would awaken something in me." He looked down at the box in his hands. "It was selfish and manipulative, and I'm sorry for that." Lucy absorbed the confession in silence. Somehow she wasn't entirely surprised. There had always been something enigmatic about Richard's sudden change on that first day. "And did it work?" she finally asked. "The experiment?" A sad smile curved his lips. "More than I could have ever imagined. Seeing Sophia sitting on the white marble floor in that little red dress, laughing while you rattled a pot lid to distract her." He paused, the emotion clearly visible on his face. "It was as if something frozen inside me began to thaw. A slow and sometimes painful process, but an irreversible one." "Then I don't regret coming," Lucy said softly, "even if it started as an experiment." Richard looked up, his eyes shining with an emotion she had never seen in them before. "What began as a selfish act turned into the greatest blessing of my life. Lucy, Sophia, and you brought me back to life. And this gift is my way of saying thank you, though it's completely inadequate to express what I feel." He opened the box, revealing 2 pieces of jewelry, a small gold children's bracelet with a star-shaped charm, and a simple, elegant ring with a blue stone in the center. "The bracelet is for Sophia," he explained. "The star is made from the gold of my family's old pocket watch, the one she loved to play with. I thought it would be fitting to turn it into something for her, since she was the first to touch it after so many years." He paused. "And the ring? Well, that's up to you." Lucy felt the air leave her lungs. "Richard, I'm not proposing marriage," he clarified quickly. "At least not yet. That would be hasty and probably frightening for you. This is a promise ring, Lucy. A promise that if you'll allow me, I would like to explore what's happening between us. Slowly, respectfully, at your own pace." She looked at the ring, then at his face, that face that had transformed so much in recent months. The cold, calculating man had given way to someone warm, vulnerable, capable of laughter and tears. Someone who assembled toys on the floor, told bedtime stories, and spent hours patiently explaining the names of flowers in the garden to a baby. "I'm scared," she finally admitted. "Not of you, but of what this means. We come from such different worlds." "I'm scared too," he confessed. "I'm scared I won't be enough, that I won't know how to be the man you and Sophia deserve. But I'm willing to try if you are." Lucy reached out, gently touching his face. "I accept the promise," she said quietly, "and I make one in return. I promise to be patient while you learn to be that man. And I promise to show you that you're already much more of that man than you realize." Richard took the ring and, with slightly trembling fingers, placed it on her finger. It was perfect, not too ostentatious to make her feel uncomfortable, nor too simple to seem like an empty gesture. "Thank you," he murmured, holding her hand in his, "for bringing Sophia into my life, for giving me a second chance to feel." The sound of cheerful knocking on the door interrupted the moment. The voice of Paul, the gardener, came from the other side. "Mr. Richard, the first guests have arrived, and the birthday girl is looking for you both." They stood up, still holding hands, a shared smile that said more than words. "Let's go," Lucy said. "Our little girl's party is starting." Sophia's birthday party was exactly as Lucy had imagined, despite all the luxuries: warm, joyful, full of laughter and genuine moments. The mansion's kitchen, instead of the formal dining room, became the center of the celebrations, a deliberate choice by Richard, who wanted everyone to feel at ease. The guests were a surprisingly harmonious mix: mansion staff and their families, some of Lucy's neighbors and friends from the Bronx, a few mothers from the community facing similar situations to hers, and even some executives from Montgomery Holdings who had developed a closer relationship with Richard in recent months. Sophia, stunning in her white dress and flower headband, was the center of attention. She was already taking a few wobbly steps, holding onto furniture or adult hands, and her vocabulary was limited to a few words. "Mama, Ita no," and more recently, to everyone's astonishment and emotion, "Richie," her childish attempt at Richard. The afternoon progressed with simple games for the children present, soft music playing on the sound system, and lively conversations among adults who, under normal circumstances, would never have met. Lucy watched it all with a mixture of disbelief and gratitude, the new ring shining discreetly on her finger. "Are you happy?" Richard asked, approaching with 2 glasses of juice. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied, accepting the drink. "Look at all these worlds coming together, these people connecting. It's almost magical." "It's the Sophia effect," he said, smiling as he watched the little birthday girl being carried by Mrs. Gable, who was showing every guest how grown-up and smart the girl was. "She breaks down barriers just by existing." The time came for the cake, an artistic creation representing an open book with flowers and stars, symbolizing, as Richard explained, all the wonderful stories yet to come in her life. When everyone gathered to sing "Happy Birthday," Sophia was on Lucy's lap, but she constantly reached her little arms out towards Richard. "She wants to be with you too," Lucy said. "Come over here." Richard hesitated for a moment, aware of the looks, the possible interpretations, the fact that this simple gesture would publicly cross a line they had kept private until now. But then Sophia let out a loud "Richie," and any hesitation vanished. He stood beside Lucy, forming a semicircle around the cake with Sophia between them. The image, the powerful businessman, the former cleaner, and the little girl in the white dress was so natural, so right, that no one watching them could doubt the deep connection that bound them. When the song ended, and it was time to blow out the candle, Richard moved even closer, forming a single unit with Lucy and Sophia. Together like a family, they blew out the small flame. The applause that followed was interrupted by an extraordinary moment. Sophia, holding tightly onto Lucy's hands, looked at Richard and, with surprising clarity for her age, pronounced, "Daddy." The silence that fell over the kitchen was almost palpable. Lucy felt the air leave her lungs, and Richard stood absolutely still, as if fearing any movement might dissipate what had just happened. "Did she say?" he began, his voice trembling. "Daddy," Lucy confirmed, equally moved. "She called you Dad." Without caring about the stairs, the conventions, or anything beyond the present moment, Richard took Sophia in his arms and hugged her against his chest. A tear, something no one had ever seen on his face, rolled down his cheek without any attempt to hide it. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice choked with emotion, speaking as much to Sophia as to Lucy, to the universe that had brought them together. "Thank you." At that moment, surrounded by people from all walks of life, in a kitchen that had become the true heart of the mansion, Lucy understood that sometimes the greatest revolutions begin with the simplest gestures. A year ago, desperate not to lose her job, she had brought her daughter to the home of the coldest man she knew. What had seemed like a decision born of desperation turned out to be the beginning of a journey of healing and transformation. Richard's seemingly cruel order, "Bring your daughter to the mansion," had, In fact, been the hesitant first step of a man trying to find his way back to his own humanity. And Sophia, with her innocence and unconditional joy, had become the bridge that allowed him to cross the abyss of pain that separated him from life. 3 months later, the Sunshine Corner at Montgomery Holdings was officially inaugurated, not just at the mansion, but in all company branches across the country. The project, initially viewed with skepticism by some more conservative executives, quickly became a case study in corporate social innovation, generating not only well-being for employees, but also record productivity and unprecedented loyalty. Lucy, who started as a special consultant for the project, now officially coordinated it, having returned to school to complete her degree in pedagogy, a dream she had abandoned when she became pregnant. And as for the mansion, once known for its oppressive silence, it now echoed daily with children's laughter, lively conversations in the kitchen, and Sophia's increasingly articulate attempts to form complete sentences, almost always starting with Daddy or Mommy. Richard and Lucy decided to take things slow, building their relationship on a solid foundation of mutual respect and open communication. He got to know her reality. He visited her small apartment in the Bronx, met her neighbors, stood in line at supermarkets, and discovered the beauty in the small daily struggles that had always been invisible from his privileged world. She, in turn, learned to navigate his universe, corporate meetings, social events, the constant media attention after their story became public. They both found challenges and lessons in these new territories, but what anchored them was the certainty that they had found something rare, a genuine connection that transcended social barriers and healed old wounds. On a quiet afternoon, as they watched Sophia playing in the garden, now redesigned to include a full playground, Richard took Lucy's hand and murmured, "Did you know there's a Japanese expression called kintsugi? So it's the art of repairing broken objects with gold in the cracks, making them even more beautiful and valuable than they were before." "That's a beautiful image," she replied, leaning her head against his shoulder. "It's what I feel you two did for me," he continued, watching Sophia chase a butterfly. "You found a broken man and, instead of trying to hide the cracks or pretend they didn't exist, you filled them with something precious. You turned my scars into part of my beauty." Lucy lifted her face to his, her eyes shining with restrained emotion. "And you gave us a home, Richard. Not just a roof or material comfort, but a true home, a place where we are loved, protected and valued for who we are." That night, when all the staff had retired and the mansion was quiet, Richard sat on the edge of Sophia's bed, who now officially slept in the old nursery, transformed into a magical space worthy of any child's dream. Beside him, Lucy watched her daughter sleep, her angelic face illuminated by a moon-shaped lamp. "I never imagined my life would change so much because of one impulsive order," he commented, almost whispering so as not to wake the little one. "When I told you to bring Sophia, I was just testing myself, seeing if I could still feel something." "And what did you discover?" Lucy asked, lacing her fingers with his. Richard smiled, that genuine smile that had become increasingly frequent on his face. "I discovered that it's never too late to start over. That sometimes what seems like a cruel decision can carry within it the seeds of redemption. And that love," he paused, looking at Sophia, then at Lucy, "love has the power to turn marble mansions into real homes." Lucy leaned in and kissed him softly. "And broken people into whole families," she completed. As they left the room hand in hand, contemplating the future they would build together, they both silently reflected on the strange paths of destiny. How a situation born of desperation had transformed into salvation. How an order that seemed cold had actually been the first hesitant step towards warmth. And how a little girl named Sophia, in her little red dress sitting on a white marble floor, had achieved what seemed impossible, melting the frozen heart of Richard Montgomery and turning a house of rigid rules into a home filled with love, laughter and possibilities. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Lucy, Sophia and Richard has warmed your hearts. To continue this emotional journey, we have prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories. Find it here by clicking on the left side of the screen. If this narrative of redemption and new beginnings touched you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave a like on the video. Every day we bring you unique stories that explore the complexity of human feelings and the capacity for transformation that exists in each of us. Share your thoughts in the comments about this family born from the improbable. Which moment moved you the most? The first time Sophia called Richard Daddy, or when he finally allowed himself to cry in front of everyone? We look forward to reading your comments.